Hello and welcome to Mcasts. This is Dr. Mark Miravalle, Professor of Theology and Mariology at the Franciscan University of Steubenville. My friends, I'm just recently back from a pilgrimage to Guadalupe, and I can't recommend more strongly the possibility of you considering making a pilgrimage to Guadalupe. Now, before all the objections come flying in, let me try to respond to some of them. One is financial. We went. My family and I, several of my children and myself went down. The tickets to Guadalupe, and I have no stock in airlines here, but just to let you know practically, the tickets to go down from Pittsburgh to Mexico City were cheaper than Pittsburgh anywhere else in the country just about. It was a little over $300. And I know we're all concerned about finances, but Our Lady of Guadalupe is the patroness of the Americas. And I can't tell you the graces that we receive when we go in pilgrimage, in faith, even with some sacrifice to the patroness of our continent, which is Our Lady of Guadalupe. So pray about it, consider it. More wild things have happened. If you feel you're called, ask our Blessed Mother for the means. If you have a need for the means, just give it a prayerful consideration, because the graces are phenomenal. Did you know Our Lady of Guadalupe is the most pilgrimaged Marian apparition site in the world? Even beyond Lourdes and Fatima and Medjugorje is Our Lady of Guadalupe. So I encourage you to give it a thought, give it a prayer. And for those who cannot go down, let me try to explain some of the richness of the message, the phenomena, and the historic fruits of Our Lady coming. You know, my friends, sometimes people say, for evangelization, the church is called to have a new evangelization which has to downplay things explicitly Catholic. Mary, the Holy Father, the Eucharist. We have to talk about Jesus and only about Jesus. Now, I want you to consider that idea for a moment, and let's examine that according to God's perspective. How did God evangelize? Well, the first thing God the Father did was He sent an angel to a 15-year-old Immaculate Virgin. And the Virgin said yes, and that's how the God-man entered the world. Mary came first, chronologically, not first in the order of importance, but chronologically, Mary's yes led the way to the first evangelization of Christianity. And that's Scripture. And that's exactly what happened at Guadalupe again, for the second greatest evangelization in the history of Christianity. After what the apostles did, you have what Our Lady of Guadalupe does with having, within the 6 years after the apparitions, some 9 million Catholics. And then you have the largest Catholic continent in the world, which is Latin America. So, if you want to do it God the Father's way, you want to spread the faith the way that God the Father did it, you start with Mary. And when you start with Mary, Jesus comes with a exponential force and grace and power and effectiveness in evangelization. So, what's the context of Our Lady's coming to Guadalupe? We've got 1531. We have the people who have experienced two forms of oppression in different degrees. The first is the Aztec religion, who has a religion that, according to one of the major historians of our times, is the most explicitly satanic religion in modern times. The symbol of near universal Mexican religion is the serpent. The mode of worship is human sacrifice followed by cannibalism. In fact, in 1487, in erecting the temple of Tlaxcala, who was one of the devil gods, they called him the hummingbird wizard, the lover of blood, in the dedication of the temple to him, in 4 days, 80,000 people were sacrificed. It took the sacrificial priests approximately 30 to 45 seconds to rip out the still beating hearts from the victims. And then they would gather skulls in one section and other bones in different sections of the temple. In fact, it was so physically demanding that the priests, the Aztec sacrificial priests, had to relieve themselves, and it was the priests who lived in the temple. After 4 days, the people left just out of the pure stench of having 80,000 corpses in the center of Mexico City. And you know who was there? You know one of the people that was there? Juan Diego, as a 12-year-old boy. He was there. And so the Juan Diego in his early 50s, who hears music from the top of Tepeyac Hill, he knew torture, he knew tragedy, he knew horrific Holocaust, he knew great oppression, and yet he says yes to Jesus, and he says yes to Mary, he becomes Catholic, and he's en route to going to Mass. Typically a 5-mile walk to Mass, or jog in his case, there and back every morning. Sometimes we complain about a 15-minute ride to Mass. Sometimes we have 3 or 4 daily Masses we could go to, and we missed them all. Juan Diego did not miss his, even though it took probably 3 hours of total time for him to hit daily Mass. Well, as he's going to Mass, he hears from the top of Tepeyac Hill a beautiful melody, music. And he goes up and he sees an image, a vision of our Blessed Mother. Now, this is December 9th, 1531. It's the middle of the 3-day celebration of the Immaculate Conception. And of course, the second form of oppression, although significantly different than Aztec oppression, but still in some cases, sadly, modes of oppression came from some of the Spanish conquistadors. Elements of slavery and theft and mistreatment of the Indian people. Not all, not Bishop Zumarraga, who had been given an award by at that time, the Emperor Charles V, being the defender of the Indian people. But it was to that bishop that Our Lady would have a message sent through Juan Diego. So in that celebration, that 3-day celebration, it tells us something very fascinating, even about the name Guadalupe. There's been very good research that gives the indication that the Nahuatl, the native language of the Indian people, the name that Juan Diego would say was, in reference to the lady, Guadalupe in the Nahuatl dialect, sounded like Guadalupe to Bishop Zumarraga, who could not speak the dialect. But in greater translation and study, in Nahuatl, Guadalupe does not mean Guadalupe, which is actually a Marian shrine in Spain. It means she who crushes the stone serpent. Now, isn't that phenomenal during the celebration of the Feast of the Immaculate Conception? What is that? But that's Genesis 3:15. That's the mother crushing the head of Satan, of the serpent, in today, in an ongoing role of our Blessed Mother in battling Satan for souls. So, in our next segment, we're going to talk about exactly what does Our Lady say to St. Juan Diego, and how do we arrive at having God's portrait, God's masterpiece, a miraculous image of our Blessed Mother. Stay with us during our segments on Our Lady of Guadalupe, Patroness of Americas. This is Mark Miravalle for Mcast saying, God bless.